It was an ordinary spring day at Armand and Associates, the insurance agency where Don worked. 5 years ago, he had left a large office where 60 hours was considered an easy week. His current job was much more laid back, but the agency had a good reputation, which provided enough clients for Don and his family to make a good living. It was a small office with 5 brokers and 10 employees. Don had been working there as a broker for almost 4 years now. He loved his job. In his first few years in insurance, Don had learned the industry and found that he knew how to talk to people. He especially liked the fact that he didn't have to use high-pressure sales tactics. People needed car and home insurance, and as long as his company provided decent rates, the coverage sold itself. In fact, it was the customer relationships that kept Don coming back. People liked Don's laid-back style. He spent a lot of time just keeping in touch with customers and making sure his company was meeting their needs. Although Don spent a lot of time on the phone, today's call was unusual. He received a call from a woman who called herself Terry and asked if they could meet. Don was more than happy to meet another potential client and asked if she could stop by the office. "I don't want to buy insurance, Mr. Premack, but I need to meet you. You don't know me, but I have information you should familiarize yourself with," she said. Don started to ask questions, but Terry was secretive. "This is a personal matter. It's not about business, and I'm not selling anything. Could you meet with me for a few minutes this afternoon?" Don thought it was strange and perhaps even dangerous to meet with someone like this, but the call was intriguing, and his curiosity was piqued. He spent a lot of time meeting and socializing with people, and over the years he'd made quite a few strange acquaintances. This Terry struck him as well-spoken and sincere. She was secretive, but he thought, "I'll have to go and find out what this is all about." The coffee shop was one of those neighborhood places, not a typical chain store. It was a place to sit and relax with a friend or two, mostly uncomfortable cushion chairs, but there were also a few tables and chairs for those who needed to work. In the late afternoon, the place was empty. 3 students sat at tables with books and papers spread around their laptops. They had their heads down in concentration, and none of them looked up when Don walked in. He stopped a few feet from the door and looked around the room for Terry. Terry had said she would be wearing a green shirt, and she was easily spotted sitting in the far corner in one of the upholstered chairs. Don walked over to her. "Hello, I'm Don Premack." He extended his hand and shook it lightly. "Hello, I'm Terry Dixon," she said with a slight smile on her face. "Would you like some coffee before we talk?" "No, thank you. I don't have much time," Don said in case he needed to make a quick getaway. He hated slick sales tactics, but he knew how to set up and carry on a conversation. Setting the person he was talking to up for an easy getaway was a comfort to both parties in case he had to end the conversation quickly. "Have we met before, Miss Dixon?" They had already established that fact in the previous phone conversation, but Don was just trying to bring Terry up to speed on the conversation. "No, we haven't met," Terry replied, but didn't elaborate. Don could see she was nervous. Don sat down in the comfortable chair across from Terry. "Okay, I'm curious. What are we meeting about today? Your phone call was very cryptic. How can I help you?" Don didn't know Terry, but he could clearly see that she was uncomfortable. Her eyes searched Don's eyes for several seconds. She seemed to be trying to get to know him better without speaking. Don smiled, trying to soothe her discomfort. "I don't need anything, Mr. Premack, but I have some information you should familiarize yourself with. We don't know each other. I don't think we've ever met, but our spouses both work for Devon Construction." The conversation paused for a few seconds. Terry and Don looked at each other. Don didn't know where this conversation would lead, but he had an unsettling feeling. The look on Terry's face expressed deep concern or maybe fear, and that look made Don uneasy. For a moment, they just stared at each other, trying to feel more at ease in this slightly tense atmosphere. Terry started to speak but paused as if searching for a word. Then her voice became more determined. "I'll get right to the point, Mr. Premack. I have some bad news for you. I brought you here today to show you evidence from a private investigative firm I recently hired." Terry was silent for a few seconds, giving Don time to swallow this little bit of information. Don's previous uneasy feeling suddenly turned to fear. It had been a curious conversation so far, but now his mind was suddenly clear. Now he concentrated, trying to anticipate where this conversation would lead. Each of the roads he foresaw led where he didn't want to go. He looked intently into Terry's eyes. It was as if he was trying to see her words before she said them. He couldn't see her words, but he could see her sadness. "What's the evidence?" asked Don. "Well, as I said, I know that your wife works for Dave in construction and my husband is the vice president of marketing for that company. I'm sorry to break this news to you, but your wife and my husband are having an affair." Suddenly, the room seemed to shrink. Don's eyes could still see, but there was nothing around him. His brain seemed to be running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, yet fixated on a single thought. Was Brenda cheating? For a few moments, his eyes stared into the void. Whatever visual information was coming into his eyes was not registering in his brain. After a few seconds, Don's consciousness started working again. Finally, he raised his eyes to Terry. His eyes searched her gaze for understanding, but he still saw only sadness. Don wasn't sure he could hold a coherent conversation. He didn't know what to say next. When Terry had first read the private investigator's report, it had broken her heart. Now her heart was breaking again as she watched Don's sadness and confusion. Terry sat like that for about a minute, giving Don time to comprehend what she had heard. "What do you mean by an affair?" Ask Don. What were they doing? For how long? "The private investigator I hired believes the affair has been going on for about a year. They got the information from a couple of Devon construction employees who work with George and Brenda." Don realized that Terry knew his wife's name. That fact made a knot in his stomach. Apparently, they have lunch at least once a week. It didn't take the investigator long to determine they were going to a hotel near the office. Terry pulled an envelope from her purse and held it out across the table. "Here's everything," she said. "I don't have pictures of them together, but we've got audio. We also have phone calls, text messages, and email evidence. My private investigator has been very thorough." "Oh my God," was all Don could utter. It was all too real and happening too fast. He hadn't been sure earlier what this meeting with Terry was for, but he certainly hadn't expected this. He was silent for a moment and stared at the envelope. The name Howard Investigative Service was prominently displayed on it. He had an idea of what was inside, but couldn't bring himself to take it out. Terry noticed Don looking at the envelope. "It's all in there," Terry said quietly. Don didn't know what to say back. He didn't know what to do next, but from what Terry was saying, she had the evidence. Her demeanor was so serious and her sadness so obvious that Don realized what she was saying must be true. Brid. Don couldn't believe that his wife could cheat on him and that she had been cheating for some time. Finally, he spoke up. "A whole year or more, how could I not have noticed it?" "There must have been some signs," Don said aloud, but not really addressing Terry. "I know. I didn't suspect George either. We've always been such a close couple. I was as shocked as you were, Mr. Primack. I only assigned him to investigate because someone from Davin Construction sent me an anonymous letter. Please, you can call me Don. May I call you Terry? We seem to have something in common." "Okay, Don. I plan to meet with George tomorrow, but I wanted you to know first. I'm sure your wife will find out about their exposure right after I meet with George." Her statement shocked Don somewhat. "Tomorrow? Why tomorrow? Can you wait a day or two and give me time to gather my thoughts? I need to think this through. I don't know what to do next, and I need time to think. Could you wait a day or two?" "Okay, sure, Don. I can wait a few days. After all, I've known or suspected for weeks, but I don't want to wait too long. The investigative people told me that the lovers are planning a trip together in a couple weeks, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let them take a trip like two lovebirds." "Oh, wow. That must be the conference Brenda's been talking about for the last month. When is it? Didn't I?" "I don't know if there's going to be an actual conference, but the private investigators said they have a 4-day cruise for adults booked starting on the 14th of this month." Don was still in a state of shock. How the hell could she do this? We have 2 small children? Terry placed the envelope in front of Don. "This is your copy, Don. I warn you, it's hard to read. It's like a stab to the heart when you realize that someone you love is so deceitful and destructive. I'm so sorry to bring you this news. I wrote my cell phone number on the envelope. Call me when you have time to think about it." Terry seemed so calm, Don thought, but immediately realized that she had known everything for a long time. He had just learned this terrible news, but he already realized that if it was true, his marriage was over. "Thank you, Terry. I'll call you soon. Give me some time to digest all of this. Since I'm asking you to hold off on talking to George, I'm not going to see Brenda until I tell you I'm going to do it. I just don't know what I'm going to do right now. I have some planning to do. Don, I'm so mad at George for ruining our lives. You're in shock right now, but trust me, your emotions are about to turn to anger. I don't know how you plan to handle this, but I will not stay married to a man who cheats on me. I'm so angry I want to make him pay. I would love to get back at that selfish, cheating bastard. I just can't figure out how to do it. I guess I'll just confront him and then divorce him, and he probably won't care. He and Brenda will probably ride off into the sunset, and you and I will be left in the dust. If you have any ideas on how to make them pay, please let me know. Maybe we can send emails to the people they work with. Maybe we can use a private investigator to get more information. I'm just not sure that would work. I'm still working with an investigative firm. Make them pay, question Don, looking around the coffee shop. Yeah, maybe I can come up with something for Terry. I'll think about it. It's all so confusing. Right now, I just don't know. I'm sorry to bring you such bad news today, Don, Terry said, getting up from her chair. Call me if you need anything. I'll talk to you soon. Terry left the cafe, and Don sat for another minute watching the students do their work. What the hell am I supposed to do now? Thought Don. Don sat down and stared at the envelope. Looking at what was inside was the last thing he wanted to do. But he knew it was the necessary next step forward. His way forward lay through this envelope. He reached across the table and began pulling out the papers, chuckling humorlessly at the irony of the situation. Looks like I'm doing my homework like everyone else here, he thought, but I have a feeling that this homework will almost certainly change my life. His thoughts turned to the kids. It was going to shatter their world. It was then that he fully realized that if what Terry had said was true, if the envelope proved that Brenda was having an affair, divorce was inevitable. He simply couldn't stay with a cheating wife. They didn't have a perfect marriage, but it wasn't a bad one either. What's more, up until today, Don thought it was pretty darn good. But apparently, Brenda wasn't okay with that, and she didn't respect him enough to talk to him or even leave him for a lover. He wondered what part he had played in Brenda's infidelity. Had he been inattentive to her other needs? Don left work early, and Brenda wasn't expecting him home until a couple hours later, so he sat quietly and read the report with all its sordid details. It took him almost 2 hours to go through everything. There was a lot of information, and all of it was so incredible. There was a thumb drive with recordings of conversations that had also been transcribed into documents, and several pictures of them holding hands together and kissing. There were also pictures of them going in and out of hotels. All of this made Don uncomfortable. He looked around for a restroom in case he needed to jump up and throw up. By the time he finished reading, everything was crystal clear. Brenda was not a loving, caring wife and mother. She was not a mother who cared about the welfare of her family. She was a selfish, lying, cheating whore, and had been for over a year. Not only was she seeing her lover at least once a week, but they were together on 2 business trips as well. He felt like he knew her almost better than she knew herself, but in truth, he had no idea what kind of person she was. 7 years ago, Don and Brenda had first met shortly after graduating from college. They both worked for a technology firm that provided inventory management services for large enterprises. Don began working on one of the many aspects of the company's services as an assistant product manager. Brenda had been with the company for about a year and worked in accounting. They first met at the company's holiday party in late December. The company was throwing a party downtown, and it was a formal event. "Brenda, you look beautiful when you dress up," Natalie said. Natalie was one of the many friends Brenda had already made at Davin Construction. She and a group of 5 girls decided to go to the party together. "Thanks, Nat. I like to play dress-up sometimes." "Well, you cleaned up well, Bren. That red dress really suits you. It fits your shape perfectly. The guys are going to be all over you tonight," Nat said with a wink. Brenda wasn't sure how many guys would be looking in her direction, but she didn't mind. She didn't usually try to attract guys. With light brown straight hair and brown eyes, Brenda thought her face was pretty enough. But she had always considered herself a little chubby and didn't have a figure that seemed to attract guys. At 5'4" tall, she wasn't as tall as Natalie, and guys seemed to really like short girls. Plus, she didn't often take the time to do her hair and makeup like the others. Brenda preferred to focus on work and go out with friends on the weekends. She was very outgoing, but she wasn't flashy like many around her. When they went out to bars and clubs, it seemed like guys were always more interested in the other girls in her group. Several times when guys hit on Brenda's friends, she got into a relationship with one of them. And more than once, she ended up in bed with a guy. But at a holiday party, Brenda caught Don's eye. She seemed so unassuming, standing with the rest of her friends. In his opinion, she was the prettiest of them all, and he wanted to meet her. Brenda saw Don walking toward her group. He was one of many who approached them with an offer to dance. She assumed it wouldn't be long before he asked Natalie or Teresa to dance, but as he got closer, he looked directly at her. "Would you like to dance?" Don asked, looking Brenda straight in the eye. Brenda was pleasantly surprised and agreed. After the dance was over, Don asked her to stay on the dance floor for one more. Soon they had been together for over an hour. "You are a beautiful woman, and I would like to get to know you better," Don told her. "Can I get your phone number and call you sometime?" Brenda smiled and nodded. They walked back to the table, and Don handed Brenda his cell phone. "Send a text to your phone, and then I'll have your number." Don then looked into Brenda's eyes, smiled, nodded, and left. "Score," Natalie said, looking at Brenda and winking. "Next chapter." In the days that followed, Brenda thought about Don a lot. He had been so nice at the party and very attentive. He had her phone number, and now she wondered if he would call. "I'm not going to get my hopes up," she thought. Too many times in the past, she'd waited for a guy to call, and then he didn't. But on Monday night, Brenda was pleasantly surprised that Don had called and asked her out to a movie on Friday. The Friday movie date went great, and soon they were spending almost all of their free time together. Don quickly fell in love with her, and Brenda loved the attention. She wasn't used to a man giving her so much attention. He was smitten and wooed her with flowers and candy. When they were dating, he always tried to make every date special. Brenda loved to be pampered, and he won her over. Nerds get lucky sometimes, Don thought to himself. Brenda really liked to be pampered and told all of her friends about him. Brenda had a large circle of friends and was constantly posting on Facebook. "He's a romantic," Teresa wrote, and then added, "He's Brenda's keeper. You don't meet those types every day." After the lovely date, Brenda returned home and lay on her bed, still fully clothed. The date had gone wonderfully, and she was in a state of euphoria. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced since her first love in high school. "I found a man who thinks I'm special. I didn't realize men didn't do that anymore." Don held her hand as they walked and opened doors for her. He was constantly giving her unintentional signs of attention. A light kiss on the cheek and her heart sank. Brenda realized that she was quickly falling in love with him. She felt like she was being swept off her feet and enjoyed every minute of it. Falling in love is a wonderful feeling. Don and Brenda had been dating for about a month now and still spent most of their free time together. This Friday night was no exception, but Don had something special planned. "Where are we going tonight?" asked Brenda. "You'll see. It's a surprise," he said as they drove downtown. Brenda was intrigued. Finally, Don started circling, and Brenda realized he was looking for parking. "There are some spots over there," Brenda pointed out. A few minutes later, they were standing in front of the club. The sign said Blue October was performing there. "Oh my goodness, Don, how do you know I'm a big fan of Blue October?" "Of course I saw them among your favorites on your Facebook page," he said with a wide smile. "Thanks, Don. I don't know how to thank you enough." Then she paused and adopted a serious expression. "Yes, I do know how to thank you, but it will have to wait until later tonight." Brenda was smiling broadly now. Blue October had lived up to her expectations quite well, and they left the club after a wonderful evening. Later, they went to Brenda's house. Brenda wasn't shy, but with this guy wooing her, she was slower than usual. She didn't want to scare off a man who seemed to want a serious relationship. Still, when they got home, they got down to it. Next chapter. They were married in a simple ceremony attended by a large group of their friends and family. In addition to her family, Brenda's entire social circle attended the ceremony. For the next few months, Brenda was so happy and loved her married life. She was constantly dragging Don to events and parties and posting lots of pictures of their adventures. Brenda loved keeping people up to date on all the little happenings in their lives. She seemed to be very proud of her boyfriend, and it made Don feel special. He wondered if anyone really cared about the details of their lives, but she always got a lot of positive feedback on her Facebook posts. Don loved that she was so proud of their relationship and their life. Present tense. Terry had just returned from a meeting with Don and was sitting in the living room of her and George's big house. Vaulted ceiling, large fireplace running along the back wall. Terry lit the gas logs and sat looking at the flames, thinking about their life. 4 large bedrooms, a family room, and an exercise room all seemed too much now that the kids were gone. She thought about talking to George about moving. She felt they needed a change in their lives and routines. But now, of course, change was coming. George and Terry had been married for 26 years and had 2 grown children and 2 young grandchildren. Terry and George's family had been close friends for many years in their youth, so they had known each other since elementary school. Shortly after George earned his MBA, he returned home to visit his family. He had worked hard for 6 years straight, and now he had a document to prove it. He was a young man and felt at the top of his game, ready to embrace all that the world had to offer. Now George's parents were as proud of their young man as 2 birds and threw a graduation party for him. The festivities were held outdoors in a large backyard. They hired a caterer and everything was set up. Terry was excited to go with her parents. She hadn't seen George in years, but she had always liked him when they were young. Terry had been too young for him then, but he was always teasing and flirting with her. She remembered him telling her that she would be beautiful when she grew up, and that was when she first blushed at the boy's compliment. Now she was only 19 and George was 26. When they had first entered the backyard, George had immediately realized who she was. Although he hardly recognized the girl herself standing there with her parents, he realized it must be Terry. She had indeed grown up to be gorgeous. She was tall, blonde, and very graceful. As she stood there being greeted by George's parents, he could see her calmness. Looking at her, George thought she looked like that German girl on the beer bottle. He couldn't take his eyes off her and walked right up to his parents. George looked her right in the eye and said, "Wow, look at you all grown up." He started asking her about what she had been doing while both parents were leaving. It was obvious that they had some catching up to do, and the parents sensed where the couple's attention was directed. After the initial conversation, they dispersed through the crowd talking to other friends, but kept coming back to each other. Each time, George prepared an initial question so that he would always have a reason to approach her. At the party, Terry was fascinated by George. She felt that he paid special attention to her throughout the evening. Even though they were just friends, she was proud of him. He had obviously worked hard getting his degrees, and from what he said, had landed a good job in the San Francisco area. Later, George saw Terry and her parents talking to his parents. They had already reached the gate and were saying goodbye when George approached them. He stood next to Terry and quietly thanked her for coming. "It was good to see you again. I would have enjoyed it if we had more time to socialize. Would you mind having dinner tomorrow night?" Terry smiled and looked him straight in the eye. She wanted him to know that she appreciated his request. Sure, that would be great, George. Over the next 2 weeks, they went on several dates. George made it clear that he liked Terry, and although they kissed at the end of each evening on the last night, they lingered for 15 minutes in his car as he dropped her off. "Terry, I'm leaving for San Francisco, but I'm not forgetting about you. If you're ready for a long-distance relationship, I'd like to keep seeing you somehow. I know we'll find a way to make it work." It worked out, and they dated via email for the next year before deciding to make their relationship permanent. They married in a big wedding 18 months later, and Terry moved out west to be with George. They had now been married for 26 years. In those early years, they were a team raising the children, George working on a promotion at work, Terry taking care of the house. Things had changed in the last few years as the kids had moved away from home. They no longer had the same old family team spirit that they had in the early years. In addition, George had always had his sights set on a career but had already realized that he probably wouldn't make it to the vice president position. These days, technical savvy was required, and he just didn't know how to work with complex technology. Sometimes it seemed like the young people were speaking Greek. George and Brenda had worked together since she started working at Davin Construction. George was vice president of marketing and was well established in the firm. Brenda worked in the finance group and as a vendor manager. Marketing would sometimes run promotions with vendors, and this regularly brought Brenda and George together at various meetings. Brenda was always talkative and smiling, and George found pleasure in flirting with her. He didn't actually flirt with the women in the office. He wasn't sure how many women would flirt back, but Brenda was a special case. They seemed to really get along well with each other. They'd had lunch together a few times over the past couple months, mostly with coworkers, but a couple times the two of them had lunch together. Lately, he had started complimenting her on her clothes and hair. Brenda was trying to dress more nicely and was even wearing a little makeup. Brenda could feel George's increased attention and knew he was attracted to her. She enjoyed feeling attractive to a man, especially when he's handsome as George. At times, she caught herself thinking about him and even wondered if he was good in bed. It wouldn't hurt a girl to dream, she thought. One Wednesday at the daily morning briefing, George approached her. "Brenda, Greg tells me you've been talking to Ace Construction about a partnership. I'm meeting with them on Friday about a project and would like to know more about your connections." Brenda smiled. "I'm busy tomorrow morning, but I can find time to meet with you in the afternoon. Would 4 p.m. work for you?" "I'm sorry, Brenda, but I have a meeting in the afternoon." George saw an opportunity to bond with Brenda and said, "Could you have dinner tomorrow night? We could have a nice dinner and discuss the partnership with Ace. I promise to take you to a nice place." George smiled broadly. At night, Brenda knew George had more than just the project on his mind. At the thought of going to dinner with him, she blushed slightly. She smiled and decided to tease him. "George, I'm a married woman. I can't go out with you." He realized she was teasing. "I promised to be a gentleman, at least during dinner," he said, and winked. Brenda knew she shouldn't flirt with a guy like that. After all, they were both married, but it was just dinner. What could it hurt? If you need to find out more about Ace, I guess dinner can't hurt. She tried to act nonchalant. "As long as you take me somewhere nice," Brenda winked. Next chapter. At the next morning, Brenda carefully selected her clothes and makeup. As dinner began, Brenda felt guilty. They were at one of the best restaurants in the area. She was there with another man, with a man who liked her and had been flirting with her for months. It felt like cheating, but Brenda tried not to think about it. George was such a gentleman. He was so sophisticated and easy to talk to. She didn't plan to do anything but eat dinner. Soon she relaxed and they began to enjoy their conversation. "Brenda, you look beautiful tonight." Brenda blushed. "Thank you, George." "Yet, man." Eventually they began to touch each other with their hands, talking across the table. Brenda could feel her heart pounding. She could feel that she was wanted, just like she had been years ago with Don. "Why does George want me?" thought Brenda. "After all, he's good-looking and can get women much prettier than me." Brenda had always considered herself average in looks. She didn't like to wear makeup, and she had a few extra pounds. But as she sat at the table and he looked at her, she saw desire in his eyes. "I'm not going to let this go any farther," Brenda thought. "I love Don." Over the next few weeks, George went out of his way to talk to Brenda at work. She knew he was interested in her and enjoyed the secret excitement of her budding relationship with him. But Brenda wasn't sure if he would ask her out again. It had been about a month since their dinner, and he still hadn't mentioned that they were dating again. Finally, one day, he stopped by her office. "Brenda, could we talk again over dinner?" Brenda couldn't help herself. She was ecstatic. He really wanted her, and she felt as giddy as a schoolgirl. "Of course, George, I'd be delighted to dine with you again." At the second dinner, George again told her what a beautiful woman she was and held her hand. They talked about their likes and dislikes and found that they had much in common. They had a wonderful dinner, and George kept reaching across the table and holding her hand. As they were walking to their cars, George stopped Brenda and pulled her to him. They looked into each other's eyes, and Brenda realized what was about to happen. George opened the door of his Mercedes and placed Brenda in the front seat. Brenda felt a thrill as George walked around the car and got into the driver's seat. He told her he could get a room at a hotel on the next street over. "Take me to that hotel," she sighed. Next chapter. Thus began their affair. For over a year now, they had been having fun. At times, it seemed like a grand adventure to Brenda. Having another man in her life and planning their meetings was exciting. George seemed to be constantly working to bring them together. At the Monday morning department-wide meeting, George and Brenda sat across from each other at the conference table. While Bill from logistics was talking, Brenda glanced at George. George touched his nose. It was his sign that he was thinking about her. After the meeting, George stopped her in the hallway in front of the conference room. When the crowd dispersed, George told her that he was planning another trip for them together. They used to go to the same business meetings and then add a couple days for themselves. This time, he told her, it will be just for them. They're going on an adult cruise. Brenda nearly choked with excitement. Wow, George, a cruise! That sounds so decadent. Are you sure we can handle it? Don't worry, I have a great plan and we'll have a wonderful time. Brenda loved Don and adored the two children, but she knew that an affair could lead to serious trouble, so she promised herself to be careful. Things were so confusing that Brenda felt like she was living in a spine oval. She would travel to meet with clients, and George would fly into the same city, and they would have fun on their own time in different cities. Don and Terry suspected nothing until one night Terry smelled a woman's perfume on George. After that, she made sure to hug him whenever he came home. It wasn't long before Terry smelled the same perfume on him about once a week. Terry still felt that there must be some other explanation for this. She couldn't imagine George being a cheater, but lately, George had changed. The sincerity of his attentions seemed to have been replaced by the fact that he was simply fulfilling his duties. He loved to travel, but they hadn't flown anywhere in over 10 months. It was a record for them without traveling. And then she got that little note. Just a few words, apparently, from George's co-worker, but it had Brenda's name attached to the perfume. Her suspicions were confirmed, and Terry decided to hire detectives. It didn't take them long to find out almost everything about the affair. George had finished his preparations. He and Brenda were going to go on a small cruise. The cruise was for adults only. They were to attend a conference, but George made sure that the company's plans were canceled at the last minute. Then he and Brenda could sneak off on the cruise. Next chapter. Terry, how are you? It was Don calling her from work 2 days after their meeting at the cafe. I'm fine, as you'd expect. How about you? I'm mad as hell. I can't believe what those two are doing. I won't stand for it. I've decided I'm going to divorce Brenda. Yeah, I understand. I'm planning on divorcing George, too. Why don't we talk to them tonight? No, Terry, I have a plan to get back at them. It looks like it's going to end in divorce for both of us, but I have an idea of how we can get a little revenge. Are you ready to get a little revenge on George? Absolutely, Don. It would be nice not to be just a patty in this mess. What's your plan? Don and Terry met again over a cup of coffee, and he told her the plan. Yes, we're going to let them have an adult cruise, but it's not going to be like they planned. For the next 2 weeks, Terry and Don worked out the details of the plan. The fateful day came, and George and Brenda left for their conference in Miami. That morning, Brenda was about to walk out the door as Don stopped her. Brenda, I have loved you for 10 years. I love our life and our 2 beautiful children. I give you my whole self in this marriage, and I believe you do the same. Brenda thought Don sounded a little strange talking, but she was distracted. She was worried about missing her flight. Of course I do, Don. I love you with all my heart. Don just stared into her eyes. The words he spoke didn't even seem to reach Brenda. He saw what a lying, cheating horror she had become. She cared little for their marriage, her family, and himself. What a selfish bitch, Don thought, but decided to give her another chance. Brenda, maybe you should skip this conference and stay home with the kids and me. Since they aren't expecting you at work, we could take the kids to an amusement world and make it a family outing. How about that idea, Brenda? Just me and the kids? Don, it's too late to back out now. I have to learn our new accounting system, Brenda lied. My boss will be furious if I don't go. Don looked at her with regret. He knew it was just another of her many lies. Lies like she'd been telling all last year. Screw her, he thought, and looked directly at her. Have a wonderful time, Brenda. Next chapter, that George and Brenda were on their cruise ship waiting for it to depart. Brenda called Don. I'm here at the hotel for a conference. It's going to be busy days, but I'll try to call you in the evenings. I love you, Don. It was a short call, and Don realized they couldn't wait to get to their cabin as soon as possible. George and Brenda didn't realize that they were already being watched and photographed by 2 private investigators. Within a couple hours, they were already sending pictures to Don and Terry from the ship. Soon, Don began receiving pictures of his wife cheating on him with George at the pool. Don put the plan into action. He called Terry and told her it was time to temporarily disconnect George's cell phone. They both had joint calling plans, and the phone companies were more than willing to suspend service to George and Brenda's phones. "So let's start the game," said Don aloud. He logged into Brenda's Facebook account. Logging in was easy. Brenda used the same password for most of her personal accounts. Don posted pictures of the lovers by the pool. He muted the nudity, but it was obvious that she wasn't wearing a top. Along with the photos, Don posted the following. Facebook post. "I loved Don. He was a good husband and father, but I decided to have a lover. I don't care if Don divorces me. As you can see, my new boyfriend is a real man, and we are going on a cruise this week. What do you think? Isn't he handsome? And he's a vice president of the company I work for, so I'm moving up above the old Don. In fact, I think I've forgotten about him already. I'll try to post more pictures tomorrow. And a Facebook post." Don was counting down the time. 321 and then hit the send button. It was fun to watch all the responses over the next few hours. What the hell? What? Friends were writing on Brenda's page saying she was out of her mind and asking how she could do that to Don. Everyone was telling her she was crazy and asking how she could publish that shit. Most of the replies to the post had just one word: disconnected from friends. It worked out just as he'd planned. Don didn't know how long it would be before someone found a way to contact Brenda, but with her phone disconnected, it wasn't going to be easy. A few hours later, Don's phone rang. It was Brenda's sister, Carla. Carla had always liked Don. "Hi, how are you, Carla?" "No, I haven't heard from Brenda since last night. She's at a conference in Florida." "No, I haven't heard anything unusual." "Everything's fine. Should I be worried?" "Okay, I'll tell her you called." "Yes, I expect her to call tonight." "Okay, bye." And that Carla said she would call Brenda and then call Don back. Don texted Terry and told her that he had made Brenda's first Facebook post. "Go check it out," he suggested. "Here's the link to her page." At that, Don disconnected the phone and went to bed. Waking up the next morning, Don got the kids ready for school and turned on his phone. Carla left a message saying she couldn't reach Brenda and asking if he had heard from her. Brenda also left a message from an unknown number. She said that for some reason her phone was dead, so she had borrowed a co-worker's phone and would try to contact him tomorrow night when her conference activities were over. Don knew that Brenda, at least at this point, didn't know what was going on at home. Later in the afternoon, he received a message from the PI team that George and Brenda had left the ship and were now on the beach. Shortly after that message, pictures appeared. Don smiled, knowing that he would now have more ammunition for the evening message. As soon as Don got home from work, he received more pictures of them lying on the beach. And that's when the private investigator hit a gold mine. Apparently, George and Brenda had rented a separate small cabin tent on the beach. It wasn't exactly secluded, and the private investigator could easily use his Zoom camera. They got a 5-minute video. Don created a cloud storage account. It could be shared with people by sending them a simple link. He also gave the private investigators the ability to send messages to that account, and they sent the video and all the photos there. Don watched the video that the private investigators posted to the cloud account. "Now I have everything I need." Anger boiled in Don's brain. "I'm going to burn your cheating ass to the ground, and I'll do it in front of all your friends and family." Don checked Brenda's Facebook again, and was surprised at how many responses had come in since last night. There had been a few nasty responses from Brenda's friends earlier, but now it seemed everyone was piling on. Wait until they see the next posts, Don thought to himself. Or Don posted a few more pictures and then wrote like he was Brenda again. Facebook post, "Why is everyone so mad? George, my new lover, is a nice guy and very rich. To show you what kind of lover George is, I'm going to post all the pictures and the new video we shot to my cloud account. I think it turned out pretty good. Take a look and let me know what you think. Oh, by the way, I haven't told Don about all of this yet, so please, Mom, to see my photos and videos, just go to..." Then the cloud account web address was added. End of Facebook post. Okay, Don thought to himself, this should put an end to all illusions about Brenda as a loving wife and partner. Now everyone will know she's a cheating wife who doesn't care about her husband or her family. Now I have a lot to do, Don thought. He made an appointment with a divorce attorney for the next day. He went to the bank, withdrew half the money, and put it in a separate account. In the evening, he canceled all the credit cards. An hour later, Carla was already on the phone with Don. "Oh my God, Don. Brenda's lost her mind. I assume you've already seen her Facebook posts." Yes, Carla, I saw them this morning. Why didn't you tell me what was going on last night? I wasn't sure what was really going on. I couldn't believe Brenda made that post. Don, have you seen her latest posts? Don wanted to confess everything to Carla, but he needed a little more time. No, Carla, I've decided I don't want to see anything more from that horror sister of yours. I'm sorry, I'm taking out my anger on you. It's just that she stabbed me in the back and I'm done with her. Don, she posted more pictures and a link. She even posted a video. Is she out of her mind? How could she do this to you? Everyone is calling me because they can't reach her. Don, I have to ask you this. Is she getting back at you? She caught you cheating and this is her revenge? No way, Carla. I swear to God, I have never not once cheated on her. I don't know why she wants to be a whore, but apparently she does, and she wants everyone to know it. Have you been able to get in touch with her? What does she say? No, Don, her phone is still going to voicemail. I tried calling the cruise line. They said Brenda Primack is not registered on board. Do you know this George's last name, Don? Obviously, she must be registered under his name. No, Carla, I don't, and I don't care either. I don't care if she never comes back. If you do talk to her, tell her I have to tell the kids what's going on. I'll spare them the details and just tell them we're splitting up. I can't risk them finding out from someone else, and apparently everyone knows. Okay, Don, I'm sorry about everything. Even if she was cheating, why would she let the whole damn world know? Don, you're a good guy. You don't deserve this. I don't know why Brenda's acting like a whore. Don's phone rang again, and it was Terry. My God, Don, you really destroyed them with those pictures, and I can't believe they videotaped them. It was really hard to watch. Everyone at Devon Construction knows about those ads. Brenda's social circle was full of people from work, and the whole company is buzzing about their cruise adventure. About 10 of our friends have already called me expressing their concern and support. Terry, we have everything we need, so I think it's a good idea to get their phones back on. It won't be long before they know the concert is over. Then they can try to come back, or maybe they'll just stay on the cruise. I don't care. Don, do you really think we did the right thing? After all, their affair has gone public. I think George might even lose his job. I doubt they'll fire Brenda, but all her friends now know about her affair. Hell yeah, we did the right thing. They're liars and cheats, and they disrespected us all last year. They deserved it. Their friends and family now know them for who they are. All we did was expose what they were doing. We didn't force them to have affairs. Call me cold, Terry, but I'd give them more if I could figure out how to burn them even more. I'll divorce that bitch so fast it'll make her head swim. To hell with her. To hell with them. Don, I've loved George for so long. It's just hard to realize it's over. Terry, I would understand if Brenda came to me and told me she wanted to move on with her life, or wanted a divorce to find another man. It would be hurtful. But she would respect me and I would respect her wishes. But the way they go on with their lives, they went on a cruise together, for goodness sake. It's like they're rubbing our noses in it. They were out there having fun on some sandy beach while I watched the kids and went to work. Terry, you're a wonderful woman. You raised your children and now you spoil your grandchildren. What did George do to you? He pushed you aside when he thought he could get some young woman. With your looks, you could have had all the men you wanted, but did he? Terry, let me ask you this. Did you ever cheat on George during your marriage? No, Don, I didn't. Well, then here goes. I'm sure you've received a lot of courtship in your time. I'm sure many men flirted with you, hoping it would lead to something, but it didn't. You committed yourself to marriage, and now you got stabbed in the back for it. My advice to you is to get a good lawyer and do the paperwork. I'm meeting with my lawyers tomorrow. I've already started the divorce, Don. I've already talked to them, and they're preparing the preliminary papers. Good for you, Terry. I know you're right, Don. It's just hard to believe my life will be so different now, but I guess the other one will be better. Better because the life I lived was an illusion. The reality is that George doesn't really love me and is having fun with other women. You're right, Don. Screw George to hell with both of them. I hope they rot in hell. Okay, Don. I'll call the phone company and tell them to put George's number back on. I'll also call the private investigators firm and let them know their work is done. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Don watched SportsCenter and finished his second helping of deliciously sweet rum and Coke. The phone rang. It was Brenda calling. Don sent the receiver to voicemail. For the next 2 hours, Brenda tried to call Don about every 15 minutes. Apparently, she was leaving voicemails as well because Don could see the number of them growing. She knows it's a done deal, he thought, and disconnected the phone. Don went to bed, but he couldn't sleep. He knew the next week was going to be a busy one. In the morning, he was going to tell the kids that he and Mom were having problems and would no longer be living together. It was going to be one of the hardest conversations of his life. He knew they would be confused, and he made sure to prepare himself for their many questions. And Terry was right. This massive change in his life was not going to be easy. Don hoped that he would be able to get joint custody of the children. Sharing time with them would be the hardest part. He knew it wouldn't be easy for Brenda either. She might be a cheater, but she was a good mother to the kids. And as angry as he was at Brenda, he still felt love for her. She was smart and witty. They always knew what each of them was thinking and always enjoyed each other's company. He realized that it was possible to hate and love a person at the same time. What a screwed-up situation, he thought. Don just wished her cheating had never happened. He knew Brenda craved attention, and that probably made her easy prey for someone like George. He knew she needed help to some extent, but he never thought of her as selfish. God, my opinion of Brenda has changed in the last few weeks. She really is selfish. She actively takes advantage of everything I have to give and then does whatever she wants. She doesn't care about me or my feelings, Don thought to himself. I'm just helping her raise the kids, helping around the house. Looking back, Don couldn't understand why he hadn't noticed this before. Had he really been blinded by love for 10 years? How could he have been so stupid? I'll never let it happen again, Don thought. I believed she was the person I would grow old with. What a pipe dream. I was an idiot. Next chapter. Brenda's phone lay on the counter in their cabin on charge and hadn't made a sound for the past 3 days. Now, shortly after the cruise headed back to the States, the phone started making different noises. She picked it up and realized it was working again. What the hell? I seem to have 23 messages. Both Brenda and George realized this was not good news. What's going on, Brenda? Why do you have so many messages? Oh God, I hope nothing happened to the kids. Brenda began to panic. She saw that many of the messages were from her sister, but none from Don. Not knowing how to feel about it, she pressed a button and the phone dialed Carla's number. What the hell is going on over there? Were the first words Brenda heard. Carla hadn't finished speaking yet. How the hell could you post that shit on your Facebook page? Are you out of your mind? Brenda was totally confused. Why was Carla so angry? What is this crap on my Facebook page, that garbage about you being on a cruise with your lover George? How could you do that to Don? What about your kids? Brenda was stunned. She felt her legs growing weak. Staggering, she stepped back and sat down on the small couch in their room. She couldn't speak, and George could see the reaction on her face. Brenda tried, but nothing came out of her mouth. Brenda, are you still here? What the hell is going on? Carla, how do you know about George and the cruise? Brenda still couldn't understand what Carla had said. You posted that shit on your Facebook page, posted those pictures in that video. How could you do that? I mean, hell, you can hate Don, but what about Mom and Dad? They're not doing well for themselves. I can't believe you did that shit, Brenda. Carla, I have no idea what you're talking about. I haven't posted anything on my Facebook page in days, and I guess you're not on a cruise either. Having fun with some guy named George, are you? Oh my God, how do you know that, Carla? Because it's all over your Facebook page. You and George are on a cruise and there's a link to pictures. There's even a video of the two of you, Brenda. The phone fell out of Brenda's hands and hit the floor. She only looked at it. George looked at her in confusion. What the hell is going on, Brenda? Brenda couldn't speak. She just looked down at the phone. She couldn't pick it up. It was like molten rock. She could hear Carla keep talking. Finally, she picked up the phone and brought it to her ear again. You need to get that page down quickly and get your ass back here. Carla, we're heading back now, but we won't be in Miami until tomorrow morning. My flight won't get me home until tomorrow night. We'll take that shit off and you better think about what you're going to tell everyone. How could you do that shit, Brenda? Brenda was stunned and still unable to comprehend what she was hearing. Okay, let me get on Facebook and try to figure it out. Call me when you do, and you better call Don, but I don't know what you're going to say. Bye. Brenda hung up. Next chapter. Brenda deleted the Facebook page but didn't know how to delete the cloud account. What she saw on it was crazy. Who took those pictures? How did this crap get into her account? Someone had obviously hacked into it, but how would the hacker know about her and George and the cruise? And where did the damn pictures come from? This hacker also supplied the posts with outrageous comments and was clearly trying to make her look like some kind of slut. I actually do look like a slut, Brenda thought to herself, and it makes me look so cruel and disrespectful to Dawn in our marriage. She looked at her friends. They were less than 75. More than half of her former friends had removed themselves from her friends. My God, everyone thinks I'm some kind of cruel, evil person, and now they all hate me. Brenda decided that the 75 remaining friends just hadn't logged into her Facebook account yet. My life is ruined. What about Don and the kids? Don should know. Why hasn't he left a single message? He must hate me for what I did. How am I supposed to fix this now? And everyone at Davin Construction must know that I'm having an affair with George, the VP of marketing. God, their lives were ruined. George looked devastated. He put the pieces together. Someone was watching us, Brenda. Don must have known what we were up to and hired an investigative service. He's the hacker who posted those pictures on your account. No, George, that can't be. He would have to truly hate me to destroy me in front of all my friends and family. He's not that cruel. Brenda, think about it. How else would those pictures have gotten on your pages? And he knew about me. I've been mentioned in messages as the vice president of marketing. He knows a lot of your friends work with us, and he knew the rumors would reach Terry. I'm afraid we're both totally screwed. Brenda sat in stunned silence. Don must have found out, and in his anger tried to destroy me. And he did pretty well at it, she thought. Both she and George were probably out of work, and all her friends knew she cheated on her husband. And what about her children? She hoped they wouldn't be too affected by this. Now they're stuck on this damn ship waiting for it to slowly make its way back to the States. The cruise had suddenly turned into a hellish nightmare. This is going to be the longest 24 hours of my life, they both thought. They both felt like they were on a ship sailing toward their mutual doom, and they sat in the room most of the evening without speaking and only went out to the buffet for dinner. George, how could Don do that? Well, you were on a cruise and having fun with some other guy, George said dejectedly. I hope by some miracle Terry didn't find out about it. Screw you, George. What about my marriage? A lot of my buddy friends work at Devon Construction. The whole company has to know, and Terry too. Do you think we'll lose our jobs? I don't know, Brenda. I don't even want to think about it right now. Just thinking about what Brenda had said made George numb. He just sat there with a blank expression on his face and remained silent. They both knew what awaited them upon their return. Their lives were rolling into the abyss, and all they had to do was sit still as the boat slowly made its way back to Miami. George, I don't want to, but I just have to call Don. I have to tell him this whole thing was a mistake and find out if he posted this crap. That evening, Brenda repeatedly tried to call Don, but he didn't answer. The next morning, she tried calling again, but thought he was avoiding her. She was surprised when he answered on the second call. Hi, Brenda. How's your conference going? Don, you know very well I'm not at the conference. I know you've seen my Facebook page. In fact, you're the one who posted that shit, aren't you? How the hell could you do that? Brenda was so angry she gritted her teeth. Click. Don hung up. Brenda tried to call him back, but he didn't answer. She kept calling, and about 15 minutes later, he answered again. Listen, Brenda, I don't care how that shit got on your page. I want to talk about the fact that you left me and the kids at home while you went on some cruise and partied with your boyfriend on the beach. Brenda didn't know what to say to that. She knew that if she brought up the post again, he would hang up on her. Her anger subsided as she considered her next words. Don, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't love him, and I don't want us to break up. I need to... Brenda, I don't care what you need. I need to understand how you could do this to your family. Why do you think this behavior is acceptable? Don could hear her crying. Brenda, I don't need to hear you cry. I need you to explain why you did what you did. Brenda could only sob. Oh my God, Don. Oh my God. Her words were hard to make out, but he was able to make out something like she had to find a way to make things right. Brenda, just get your ass home and we'll work it out. Don knew he was lying. He knew the only way out was divorce, but for some reason he was trying to make it a little easier for her. Okay, Don. I'm really sorry. I really do love you. I know we can find a way to make things right. Bye, Brenda. I'll see you soon. Don hung up the phone. George Terry's call didn't go any better. She knew everything. She was the one who had hired the private investigators and was in on the Facebook plan. He knew it could cost him his job, but he couldn't be mad at Terry. He knew how much he had hurt her, and he only wanted to try to make amends and keep his family together. I don't have the words to tell you how sorry I am, Terry. I messed up, and I'm going to spend the rest of my days trying to make it up to you. It didn't dawn on George that Terry was already on the path to divorce. I love you, Terry. I'll find a way to make it up to you somehow. Terry abruptly hung up the phone. George thought it was merciful of her not to prolong the conversation. They could talk things over when he got home, he thought. 24 hours later, George and Brenda were passing through the last security checkpoint and heading for baggage claim. Standing off to the side of the exit were many nicely dressed drivers holding small signs with people's names on them. George and Brenda were not paying attention to them when two men also dressed in nice suits emerged from the crowd. George looked at them questioningly, knowing he hadn't ordered a limo to take them home. "Are you George Carlson?" one of the men asked. The other looked at Brenda. "And you're Brenda Primack?" Both nodded, still somewhat confused. Both men simultaneously reached into the leather cases they were carrying, pulled out large envelopes, and held them out to George and Brenda. "You have been served," they said in unison. 21, Part 2, Brenda's Story. Oh my God, what a bloody nightmare. I'm stuck on a ship and the world is collapsing around me. I was on the balcony of my room, standing at the railing and looking out at the ocean. I could see that we were moving. I could see the cruise ships splitting the water, but it still felt like we were standing still. It's going to take forever for that damn ship to get back to Miami. It's still hard to believe that Don not only found out about my cheating, but he posted it to everyone online. I've always loved Facebook and my social connections, but Don used them against me to get back at me for cheating on him. He made me look like a total slut who doesn't care about my husband and family. I know it was wrong to cheat on him, but it was just, I don't know, just an adventure. I still loved Don, and I still loved my kids. George and I were followed by private investigators who took secret photos and even videotaped us in the most compromising situations. And that message Don wrote on Facebook made it look like I wrote it myself. It made me look like a heartless bitch. How could I have been so stupid? What was I thinking? How could I believe Don wouldn't find out? First, George seduces me and we start sleeping together. Then we go on business trips together. And finally, this stupid cruise. I looked at the water again, same water, same wave, and it still felt like the boat wasn't moving. Now I was stuck in this room with the last person on earth I wanted to see. George, I knew this nightmare was just beginning. I knew it would erupt in full force when I got home, but I wanted to be there so badly. This slow drive back was killing me. Although it was hard to think logically, I knew I had to use this time wisely to start thinking about what I would tell Don and how I could save my marriage. God, Don must be pissed. He posted that shit on Facebook and now the whole world knows about it. That bastard should have just met me. He obviously knew what was going on. He should have kept me from taking that stupid trip. Instead, he hired a private investigator to follow me around and take pictures. He just wanted to show me he was in control and get revenge for what I was doing. Damn, I wanted to kill him so badly, but my thoughts kept coming back to the reality of what I had done. My stupid behavior wasn't Don's fault. Finding out I was having an affair must have really upset him terribly. Now I needed to go home and deal with the consequences. I needed to delete that crap from Facebook and then make sure Don knew it was all a big mistake. I need to convince him that it will never happen again. I know it will take a long time to repair the damage, but I will endure because I love Don and I want to keep our family intact. But this nightmare was even more than just the damage to my marriage. Everyone knows. Family. Friends. Everyone. What am I going to tell them? There's not much I can do to explain my actions, but I want them to know I didn't post that shit. So here I am, stuck on this cruise ship. My life is like a slow-motion disaster. The cruise ship finally crawled back to Miami. We grabbed our luggage and headed to the airport. I tried calling Don again, but the call went straight to voicemail. What time does the flight arrive, George? We had barely spoken in the last couple hours, both of us immersed in our own thoughts and just doing what we had to do to get home. I don't think either of us wanted to talk about the sense of dread that had engulfed our worlds. I wanted so badly to be home, but the closer we were, the more I feared what was about to happen. Do you think, George, your marriage will survive this? Yes, I think so. This is the only time I've ever cheated on Terry. When he said the word cheated, I realized how awful it sounded. I used to think of my actions as just a bit of fun, maybe even call it an affair. But cheating? Yes, I was a cheater. I had cheated, and there was no turning back. I'm not sure my marriage will survive. I think Don will give me a chance, but he's not the kind of guy who goes easy on everything. Hell, he's still mad at his older brother for hitting on his girlfriend in high school. We have to hope for the best, Brenda. I know I'll do everything in my power to keep Terry. So it's over between us, then? Not George quickly turned his head and looked me in the eye with a shocked expression. Then he saw that I wasn't kidding, and relief appeared on his face. We both tried to laugh it off, but neither of us were in a playful mood, so our conversation fell apart again. I woke up with a jolt as our plane landed. I don't usually sleep on airplanes, but the anxiety of the last 36 hours had exhausted me to the max. When George and I got up and retrieved our luggage from the baggage claim, we just stared at each other. It seemed we had come to a reckoning and there was nothing more to talk about. Brenda, I hope the next few days go well for you, or at least as well as can be expected. Just try to let Don know that you still love him, and maybe you can make things right. That's what I'm going to do with Terry. This is the first time for both of us, so hopefully our spouses can forgive us. I looked into George's eyes. I didn't know what to say. My vision blurred, and then tears ran down both cheeks. I just don't know how I can look him in the eye. He knows what we did, and I hurt such a good man. It still pisses me off that he had to put us on display, but maybe I'd do the exact same thing if I had the chance. He probably did exactly what I would have done under the same circumstances. We can't blame them for our indiscretion. My advice to you is don't even mention the Facebook entries. You can't blame him for anything. Just try to rebuild your marriage. The plane emptied, and we walked down the aisle and out of the plane. When we left the lounge and headed down the escalator to baggage claim, all these guys offering transportation for business people were holding up their signs. Neither George nor I paid any attention to them. We both had cars in the airport parking lots. Then we heard a couple of men calling our names. I was confused. Had Don really sent someone after me? As the men approached us, they confirmed our identities and then handed each of us an envelope. "You have been served," they said almost simultaneously. I looked at them with a blank expression. I didn't understand what they were trying to say. As the men began to leave, George looked at me. There was a deep sadness in his eyes. He wasn't confused. He knew exactly what was going on. "They're divorcing us, Brenda. These are the divorce papers." I felt my legs grow weak. It was as if my knees had turned to jelly and could no longer support my body. I just fell to the floor. I was all numb and felt tears streaming down my face. I sobbed loudly. Everyone around me looked at me with concern. After a moment I looked up, but George was no longer there. I looked down the hallway and saw him slowly walking away. 45 minutes later, I picked up my car and drove confidently to my house. I texted Don to let him know I was on my way. I'm sure he needed to prepare as much as I did. Earlier, George had advised me to repair the marriage, but now it looked like Don was headed for divorce. But that didn't mean there wasn't still a chance. I was going to give everything I had, hoping it wasn't too late. I barely remembered the drive home. My mind was spinning, but there was no way I could come up with a coherent strategy. All I knew was that I needed to go back and talk to Don. All that damn waiting on the way back, and then I was finally on the street where I lived. It was early evening, but the sun hadn't set yet. Don always parked the car in the garage, so I couldn't tell if anyone was home. Doomsday was about to begin for me, and I felt a wave of nausea roll through my stomach. Maybe he'd changed the locks and wouldn't let me in. I didn't know what was in store for me, but I finally made it home. As I approached the door, I paused for a second and listened. There were no sounds coming from inside. I grabbed the handle and turned it. It was locked. Was I right? Had he changed the locks and wasn't going to let me in? I put the key in the door and he turned the lock easily. I pushed the door open and immediately realized no one was home. The house was dark in the evening light. No dawn, no kids running to greet me. I dragged my luggage inside and turned on the hallway light. "Hello? Is anyone home?" My voice sounded loud in the quiet house. "Damn, they're not here," I muttered to myself. I left my luggage by the door and started walking around the house. Nothing was out of place, but the silence kept me on my toes. At least Dawn hadn't packed up and left me yet. I walked up the stairs heading towards our bedroom. When I reached the kids' bedroom, I turned around and looked inside. The beds were unmade and toys were scattered all over the room. I had put my selfish desires before my family, and now I could lose it all. Seeing the kids' bedroom, toys scattered across the floor, Chelsea's pink blankets and Trevor's transformer sheet made me feel unreal. Could I really lose this reality? My family? Would I really not be welcome here anymore? I felt my legs fail me again, and I grabbed onto the doorframe to support myself. Sobs overwhelmed me again. I don't know how long I stood there crying, but I finally realized that I needed to check to see if Don had packed up and left. Maybe he took the kids to his parents' house and then packed up his stuff and left. I walked down the hallway and into our bedroom. Looking around, I realized that nothing had been touched. Don hadn't taken any of his clothes. I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe this was a positive sign. Finally, I walked down the stairs and into the kitchen. I'd eaten almost nothing for the past 2 days and decided that eating would help me clear my thoughts. On the table was a folded note from Don. Okay, here it was. At least I'd know what was going on. The note was short and to the point. Don was informing me that he and the kids were at his parents' house. Tomorrow was Sunday, and he said he'd stop by in the morning so we could talk, and then I could see the kids in the afternoon. Oh my God, I had to wait even longer. Why is Don doing this to me? It seemed like this punishment was going on indefinitely. Although deep down, I knew it was probably just beginning. I knew our conversation would be brutal, but I was determined to endure it and let him know that I still loved him. I had never stopped loving Don, but somehow I had found myself caught up in George's advances. I knew I needed to delete this crap from Facebook, so I went to our home office and logged into my account. Looking at what Don had written, and in a way that made it look like I had written it, I was beyond mad. I knew I had heard him, but damn it, he had just destroyed me with his postings. It made me look like a total uncaring slut. I deleted the post and decided I needed to post an explanation. Facebook post. I just wanted everyone to know that I didn't make the posts you've seen recently. My account was hacked. Yes, I did a horrible thing. I had an affair with a man, and I'm not proud of it, but I certainly didn't post the evidence in public. I'm sorry you had to witness that. End of Facebook post. I logged off the computer and walked up the stairs to my bedroom. I didn't even have the energy to lift my luggage. I collapsed on my bed, still in my clothes, and started crying again until I finally somehow fell asleep. The next morning I woke up in my clothes, but I had managed to get under the covers overnight. The clock showed only 7 in the morning, but I didn't know what time Dawn was coming in, so I crawled out of bed. It was only then that I realized I was still wearing yesterday's clothes. I undressed and went to the bathroom. Everything around me felt strange. Being in my house alone, showering in an empty house on a Sunday morning, the wistful feeling of having messed up my life returned. But now I wasn't crying. I was more in shock that Dawn was coming soon, and I had no idea what I would say, and more importantly, what he would say. Would he consider not divorcing me? I realized that I still hadn't looked at the papers I had been handed. What were his terms? I should have at least familiarized myself with them before he showed up. That thought gave me purpose for the morning. After taking a shower, I went down to the kitchen and made coffee and toast. Butter and strawberry jelly on toast was always my favorite, and after failing last night, I almost gulped down the food. I pulled out the newspapers and started going over what might become of my life. I'm no lawyer, and there was a lot of legal nonsense in the papers, but it looked like he wanted 50-50 the year's joint custody of the kids. We'd split the proceeds of the house. Damn, this is what 9 years of marriage has come to. I felt like I was reading a death certificate. I knew I had to find a way to somehow slow down Don's attack. I might have to get a lawyer to review these documents. I started to go back to them to examine them in more detail when suddenly I heard Don walk through the front door. I pushed myself away from the table and rushed into the living room. "Don, you're here!" I couldn't think of anything else to say. We just stared at each other as I moved toward him and opened my arms. I wanted to hug him. I had never needed a hug from anyone in my life. He looked at me expressionlessly and said nothing. As I moved closer to him, He reached out and pointed his palm at me. He pushed me away, and the hug was not meant to happen. I stopped 3 feet in front of him and, looking him straight in the eyes, began to cry. Don, I'm so sorry about what happened. His facial expression I couldn't understand. He looked angry, but even more he was confused. What did he expect me to say? Did he really think I still didn't want him? Oh God, I felt terribly sorry for this man, and I had messed up his world. I felt like the scum of the earth. I had ruined a good man's life, and now he was standing here not knowing how to deal with his cheating wife. I stood there looking at the man who had embarrassed me in front of my family and friends, but I couldn't have any negative feelings for him. I was the one who had messed this up, and I needed to find a way to make it right. Don, say something. Call me by my name. Tell me how I screwed up. But please, just talk to me. Brenda, how could you? How could you just throw our marriage away? I thought you loved me. He stopped talking and just looked me in the eyes. There was genuine confusion read on his face. He was asking a question and expecting real answers, but I had no idea how to answer them. I'm sorry, Don. What about me? He asked. I thought you loved me, and it never occurred to me that you would have fun with me. I mean, never. I thought we had something beautiful. I froze in place and then mouted. I don't know, Don. I wish I could give you answers, but somehow I just let him seduce me and things got out of control. I didn't feel like I needed anyone else, but when George started flirting with me, I got hooked on the feeling. I let it go too far. Yes, Brenda, that's the understatement of the year. You ruined our marriage. I mean, what the hell? I just stared at him. I could feel the tears rolling down my cheeks. What could I say? So he continued, What about the kids? Don't you care what happens to them? They're going to grow up in 2 different families now. Oh my God, Don, please, you have to change your mind. Please don't divorce me. I never had feelings for George. It was just my stupidity. I don't want a divorce. I love you, and I promise with all my heart to find a way to make it up to you. Could you please postpone the divorce and give me a chance to prove to you that I love you and will never do anything like this again? Please. If you can't do it for me, do it for the kids. Screw you, Brenda. Now you're trying to take it out on me. If I don't take you back, I'll ruin our family. Am I going to be responsible for putting the kids in a broken home? No, Brenda, there's no going back. You need to pack your things and go. I'll bring the kids back this afternoon. You can stay with them tonight and sleep on the couch tonight. Tomorrow, after I leave for work, you have to pack everything you need and leave before I get home. No, please, Don, don't make me leave. Tears streamed down my face, and the moisture in my mouth felt like it had turned to glue. I sobbed, and my voice was hoarse. I'm so sorry, Don. Please give us another chance. I looked down, and my eyes were full of tears. When I looked up, he was already standing at the door, and then he was gone. I fell back onto the couch and just sobbed. About an hour later, Don came back with the kids. They were happy to see me and threw themselves into my arms. I hugged them and looked at Don with sad eyes. He just looked at me with a blank expression and walked past us to our home office. I tried not to cry, but the kids could see that I was upset. I just hugged them like I didn't want to let them go, and then I realized it must have upset them. I had to pull myself together for the kids. I made them dinner and we cuddled on the couch and watched TV. Then, around 9, I put them to bed. I didn't see Don all evening until 10 p.m. when he came out of our office and went up to bed. I heard the alarm go off on my phone, and it wasn't until a minute later that I realized I was lying on the couch. To my surprise, I slept like a log and felt rested. After getting the kids ready for school, I made them porridge and brewed coffee. They ate happily, and I headed for our bedroom. As I suspected, Don wasn't there. He'd set our 2 large suitcases on the bed. Damn considerate of him. I dropped the kids off at school and headed back to the house. Maybe I wouldn't pack up and leave. After all, it's my house too. But I realized I needed to leave Don his space and his control. I would let him lead. I would continue to let him know that I still loved him, and that we needed to raise the kids together. I knew he still loved me despite all the pain I had caused. We just needed time, and I was sure his heart would soften. I called my sister. She was still single and living alone. Brenda, what's going on? Are you back in town? Yes, I got back yesterday. Don didn't waste any time, Carla. He filed me into the damn airport. I still think we can work things out, but he's very, very angry. He wants me out of the house. Can I stay with you for a while? Sure, I guess. Her answer was somewhat hesitant, and I wondered if my sister despised me for what I had done. I didn't think she really hated me, but maybe she didn't like me at the moment. Thanks, Carla. I'll come over after work, assuming I still have a job, of course. I was surprised when I walked through the door at work. I don't know what I expected, but it was fine, except for the stares and outright molestation I was getting from many of the co-workers. The day went by productively enough. I had a bunch of emails to deal with and needed to reconnect with a few associates who had left messages. During lunch, I wanted to avoid everyone, so I went to a fast food place and ate alone. Telling all day at work, I waited for my phone to ring and to be called into my boss's office, but the call never came. I saw him in the middle of the day during a meeting. After it was over, he looked at me and asked if I had regained my energy after being absent the previous week, and then mentioned that we had a lot of work to do at the end of the week to prepare for an important partnership proposal that was close to being finalized. What the heck? They weren't going to fire me? It's like they weren't even going to talk to me. I know everyone here knew about what had happened between George and me, and there was no point in them not at least reprimanding me. I found out later that week when I finally got to talk to George. He told me that they had made an agreement. We weren't going to be fired. He was forfeiting his annual bonus and going on a 1-year probationary period. They weren't going to do anything to me because they were afraid I'd sue them. I guess they just wanted it to be over as soon as possible. George also told me that he and Terry were trying to work things out. Since this was the first time he had cheated, she was going to give him a second chance. Terry put off the divorce while they went to counseling. Good for you, George. I wish Don was in the same forgiving mood. He won't even talk to me. Don gave me his lawyer's number and hardly spoke to me after our first conversation. A couple days after I got back, I moved a bunch of my stuff over to my sister's place. I was hoping that by giving Don some space and letting him know that I wasn't trying to control the situation, he would soften up and start talking to me. One week, I took my kids out to dinner. We went to one of those McDonald's that has a playground, and they enjoyed sliding down the slides and climbing on the net. As I sat there watching them, the sadness of the situation overwhelmed my mind, and I felt myself starting to cry. God, I had to hold myself together for the sake of my children. When we got back to the house later, we walked to the door, and I stood in the foyer, kissing and hugging them. I could see that they were confused. They figured I had come back to stay in the house. I brushed Chelsea's hair and tried to explain. Your dad and I had a fight, and I'm staying at Aunt Carla's for a few days. I looked up and saw Don standing in the living room. I love you guys, and I hope to be back by next week. Chelsea and Trevor looked at me. They saw my sadness, and I saw it in their eyes, too. Be good for your dad, and I'll see you guys soon. Now get up and get ready for bed. They looked at their father and headed up the stairs. Brenda, you mustn't give them false hope. You're not coming back here next week. Don, I know I screwed up big time. I know you're hurt and angry, but please don't throw it all away because of that. I made a mistake, but I promise it won't happen again. I wanted to hold myself together, but I could feel my eyes watering. I promise, Don interrupted me. He was walking toward the door. Brenda, you've been having an ongoing affair for a year. You disrespected me and obviously didn't give a damn about our marriage. Your actions have told me everything I need to know. He opened the door, indicating that it was time for me to leave. I told myself again that I had to give him time and space and left without a word. I knew I needed to talk to my parents, so I convinced Carla to accompany me on my trip to see them. She talked to them and arranged for us to go to their house for dinner on Friday. Mom and Dad always trusted me. I had always been balanced, even as a teenager. When I told them what had happened, I could see the disappointment in their eyes. I think they expected me to tell them something horrible about Don, like that he had mistreated me or neglected me, but I had nothing to say about it. By the time I finished my story, I was crying and trying to hold it together. Usually my parents did their best to ease my grief, but this night they just looked at me like they were confused. I understood their reaction. How could they comfort me? What could they say? Brenda, it's okay. It's going to be okay. No, they couldn't say any of those things. Finally, Mom came over to me and just hugged me. We love you, Brenda. We just hope Don can find a way to forgive you. The next week, I found and visited a lawyer. I needed a lawyer if only for Don to believe that I was serious about the situation. After our attorneys talked, Don was very cooperative when it came to the kids. I was going to pick up the kids on weekends and Wednesday evenings. On those Wednesdays, I could be in the house with them. He would leave and come back after they went to bed. We settled in, but Don still didn't talk to me more often than he should have. On my Wednesday visits, I started preparing large meals for the kids that they could eat for several days in a row. This helped me feel like part of the family again, and I began to enjoy those evenings. I walked into the house on Wednesday a few weeks after they started. Don usually only said hello and lingered for a minute to make sure everything was ready. "Brenda, we appreciate you cooking such great meals for us." I was pleased that he was talking to me again. "Of course, Don. Any requests? What would you like me to cook for you next week? I'd be happy to cook anything you want." I smiled. I could see that Don was suddenly uncomfortable. Whatever the kids want, that's what will happen. In the weeks that followed, I felt that giving Don space was paying off. I knew he'd like leftovers on Wednesdays, so I started doing laundry. Folding his clothes and putting them away in his drawer, I felt even more connected. One night, I wrote a note telling him that I loved doing all of these things for him and the kids. I put the note in the drawer on top of his laundry where I knew he would find it. I had hoped he would thank me when I picked up the kids on Saturday, but he never once mentioned it. Still, I knew he had softened a little. Now, we would sometimes talk about the kids and other things when he came back late Wednesday night. I could feel our conversations becoming less tense. It went on like this for several months. I told my attorney to take his time with the divorce, but also not to show that we were stalling. The waiting period was 90 days, and I planned for this nightmare to end long before then. Don seemed to be in no hurry to get a divorce, and I was going to use that to my advantage. After about a month, I decided to try to take it to the next step. The following Wednesday, I put on more revealing clothes and put on makeup. As Don was leaving in the evening, I told him that I wanted to talk when he got back, and that I had a surprise for him. I smiled as I looked into his eyes. I could see that he didn't know how to interpret my statement, but, as I hoped, he didn't question me. I just wanted to plant a seed and make him wonder what I was up to. When Don came home that evening, he looked worried. "What did you want to talk to Brenda about?" "Oh, I didn't so much want to talk as I wanted to give you something." I smiled broadly and looked him in the eye. Don's gaze traveled down my body, and I realized he was wondering if I was going to give myself to him. Actually, I had planned to, but I wasn't going to yet. "All right, it's it, Don. You didn't think I'd forget your birthday, did you?" I pulled out a small box and held it out to him. "Brenda, you didn't have to do that. Don, you're still my husband, at least for now. Please accept this gift." I looked into his eyes. He responded and smiled. Taking the gift, he opened it and revealed a beautiful Omega Seamaster watch. I knew he liked to wear quality watches, and this one was his style. I stood next to him while he opened the watch. I wanted him to smell my perfume. He put it on and looked at me, smiling. I realized he was at the End Zone, a local sports bar, and I could smell the alcohol in his breath. This was my chance. "There's something else I want to give you, Don." He didn't bother to ask what it was, just looked me in the eyes. "Don, I've missed you so much these past months. I've missed our time together." I stepped closer. Don just stood there. There was a flicker of indecision in Don's eyes. "Don, please don't think about this too much. I'm not asking to move back in. I just want us to be together today on your birthday. Please take me upstairs. I know you need this, and so do I." He took my hand and pulled me up the stairs. After all the activities and fun, he said, "Brenda, I'm sorry, but I just can't do this. We can't be together again. I just don't know how I can trust you again. You'll cheat on me again. I just know you will." He threw on his clothes. Suddenly, fear was in my voice. I felt tears come to my eyes. "Stop, Don. I'll never do that again." "Oh, God, stop, Don." I jumped up and tried to wrap my arms around him. I didn't know why he was putting his clothes on, but after putting them on, he rushed down the stairs and out of the house. I ran after him and found myself in the living room as he was closing the front door. I went to the window and saw that he was already in the driveway and backing out. I fell to my knees. I just sat there and sobbed. How could this night end so horribly? After a few minutes, I rushed into the bedroom and grabbed my phone. "Please, Don, please just answer it." Thank God he answered. Don, what's wrong? Where are you? Please come back. Brenda, just stay in the house tonight. I'll be back later. I just need a time to think. I'm sorry, I panicked, but I'll come back later. Can you do that? Sure, but please come back soon. You scared me. Okay, I'll be back in a little while. I just need some time to think about it. I love you, Don. Next chapter. I was awake for at least a couple hours before I dozed off. I slept in our bed and hoped Don would wake me up by crawling back in, but that didn't happen. The next morning, I got up early and expected him to at least sleep on the couch, but he never came back. I made coffee and grabbed my phone to call him when I heard him come back through the door. I headed into the living room, and when he saw me, he stopped and stared at me. He looked like he hadn't slept a wink. Oh my God, Don, where have you been? I went to the park and slept in the car. I'm sorry I lost my temper last night. Everything that was going on in my head just overwhelmed me. It's my fault, Don. I seduced you with my birthday gift idea and took it too far. I hope I didn't ruin the progress we were making. Why don't you grab a cup of coffee and take a shower? Then we can talk. When Don stepped out of the shower, I realized he didn't have anything nice to say. Brenda, I just can't do this. I can't keep thinking about you over and over again. After you cheated on me, I was sure it was over between us, and for the last couple months I felt lost. Your absence from my life has been like a huge hole. I knew Don was really worried, but I hoped this conversation would end for the best. But it wasn't meant to be. Don told me that he thought that if we got back together, even though we were going to make it work, it would be very difficult for both of us. He said it would take years and would probably end badly. I put down my coffee and started to cry. I didn't know where to go from here. Don started crying too. We both just stood there crying. Finally, Don walked over and took my car keys from the counter and held them out to me. He put his arm around me and slowly led me to the door. Neither of us said a word. It was like we were both in shock. We knew what this walk meant. It meant that our marriage, our time together, was truly over. I walked out the door and turned to see Don standing on the porch. We both just stared at each other as he slowly closed the door. I was stunned as I got in my car and drove away. What am I supposed to do now? About a year later? Facebook post? Facebook friends and family? Not too long ago, I had a wonderful life. I had a loving husband, wonderful children, and a beautiful home. I had a good job and many loyal friends. Today, almost all of that is gone. My children are healthy, thank God, but I don't see them every day like I used to. My husband, Don, a loving, caring man, divorced me. And although my parents, siblings, and true friends have not abandoned me, our relationship is strained. All of this is my fault. I made a stupid, selfish mistake. I disrespected myself and especially my husband by having an affair with another man. I cheated on my husband. I became a cheater. I wanted to write and tell everyone I have hurt and disappointed that I am truly sorry. This experience has humbled me from my former self-sufficiency, my arrogance, and I apologize. I also write this as a warning to those who, like me, underestimate the consequences of their behavior. Your poor choices can and almost certainly will damage your life and the lives of those you love. I'm sorry about Chelsea. I'm sorry about Trevor. I'm sorry, Don. Contrary to the way I behaved, I have always loved you all. End of Facebook post. The next day I got up, opened my laptop, and logged onto Facebook. There were several responses to my previous evening's post. They were mostly positive and understanding. It warmed my heart that people could be so forgiving. I may have fewer Facebook friends now, but the ones that are left are understanding and non-judgmental. And then I saw this. It was from Don, or greetings. It was a friend request from Don. I knew we would never be together as a couple, but at least we were friends. The end.